What if the next medical breakthrough could change thousands of lives? Welcome to Moving Medicine Forward, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on the breakthroughs shaping the future of healthcare. I'm your host, Jeremy Schran, and together with CTI's leading experts, we explore the cutting edge of clinical research transforming patient care. Each episode, we dive into the science, strategy, and innovation driving medical advancements, joined by global therapeutic experts who are redefining how we understand and treat critical disease. From rare genetic conditions to revolutionary treatment protocols, we're not just discussing research, we're sharing the human stories that move medicine forward. Today, I'm joined by Ian Hennessey, Vice President of Legal Affairs at CTI. Ian's career has spanned healthcare law, regulatory compliance, and clinical research, giving him a unique perspective on the intersection of law, innovation, and patient impact. In our conversation, Ian shares how his journey from defending healthcare providers to supporting global clinical research shaped his leadership philosophy and passion for advancing medicine. We discuss the increasingly complex regulatory landscape, the challenges and opportunities of conducting research around the world, and how legal teams can serve as strategic partners in driving innovation. Let's dive right in. Welcome to the podcast, Ian. We are so lucky to have you on the show today.
Glad to be here.
Can you begin by telling us a little about your background and what led you to a career in law?
When I was in undergrad, I took a law course and it was on the Constitution, and I loved it. And I thought this could be something I could do. It probably didn't hurt that during that time, Law and Order entered syndication. And so that was on our very basic TV offerings in the dorms, something that I watched every night because there really wasn't that much else to watch other than The Simpsons.
What initially drew you to the clinical research industry and CTI?
When I look back at my career, I've spent my entire legal career in some form of healthcare. When I started practicing, I was working for a healthcare law firm doing medical malpractice defense lawsuits, defending doctors and other healthcare providers. Over time, that evolved as business needs evolved as well. I found myself doing more of the regulatory and then business side of medicine, helping to start practices, helping them to stay compliant with all the new laws and regulations that would come down the pike and to help them hopefully thrive. And in my view, indirectly contributing to the wonderful work that they were doing, healing patients, treating them for other illnesses. I did not have the chops to go to medical school. And frankly, it didn't really interest me, but I've always admired, and I think as a lot of people admire, physicians and other healthcare providers and the work that they do, that they're devoted to healing people and to treating people. And this, in an indirect way, allows me to contribute to that. Even though I may not be the one who is directly providing that care, I can help the person providing that care. I spent my first 15 years of practice in a law firm setting and then transitioned in 2022 to become general counsel of a company that owns clinical research sites around the country. Before that, I had done a little bit of research work, mainly from my physician clients who would be involved as a principal investigator or other involvement within a research study. But this was my first time really being immersed into the clinical research sector. And it was an eye-opener. Just the amazing therapies that were being worked on hopefully would come to pass where they would be approved to be used in people and therefore help outcomes. And so really a continuation of the things that I found the most rewarding about representing physician clients and medical practices.
So you lead a pretty important team here at CTI. Looking back on your career, were there any experiences or mentors that had a particularly strong influence on your leadership style?
It really takes a village, as they say,
Yeah.
and I had a great village around me that I learned from. I started my practice in Knoxville, Tennessee, and the lawyers that I worked with and learned from every day for the first 15 years of my career, I wouldn't be where I am in my career without them. And so bringing me alongside and really giving me the opportunity to be exposed to new things, to be challenged by new matters that I wouldn't necessarily have otherwise come into an encounter with. Those experiences and being in the trenches with them, watching how they handled difficult matters was invaluable. And I think that the things that really resonated with me over time were a team-based approach, that we're all in this together. We may have different roles within that team. We may have different levels of experience, but we're all in this together. And I've tried to bring that forward into my time at CTI, that making sure that the members of my team feel supported and that I get them exposure into new things. And I think that ends up paying dividends for our company and those ultimately that we are serving, because the more they're exposed to, that helps them to problem solve the next big issue that we have to help navigate. I'm hoping that over time that the approach continues to pay off, not just for me, but for others in the organization.
What surprised you the most about your transition into the CRO industry? You mentioned you were in healthcare law, and then now you're in-house work here with the CRO.
Right.
And those research projects are really cool, but there's more to it than just seeing the cool projects come through.
Right. I think the speed, it's the truly global nature of the work. We have a lot of work to do. We try to get there as most pragmatically and efficiently as possible. This is not a law review where we can think about these big ideas and take our time with a dissertation. We need to help find solutions for our company, but also for our clients, our sponsors and sites and everyone we work with to try to find that path forward. And it's one of the things too that I think, as we think about the global nature of the role, that sometimes surprises, especially our friends in the medical community. A human being's anatomy and how all their various systems work doesn't change when you go across a border, but the rules do.
Yeah.
The laws can change very much by just crossing an imaginary line. And we want to make sure that we can drive and help everyone involved drive momentum forward on these studies, but do so in a compliant way, and understanding that those considerations can be different depending on where in the world you are operating.
Can you give us just a general overview of what your role is specifically, and then what your department, what it looks like, what legal affairs looks like at CTI?
Obviously, I'm going to have to add a caveat here at the beginning that there's some things in my work that are necessarily confidential. But for a broad overview, I would say we, on a daily basis, are doing legal operations. So, what that means to me is I'm working closely with our site contracting group that makes sure once we have a study that we're going to partner with a sponsor on, that we get those contracts in place to get those sites that are actually going to be working with the study subjects, with the patients, up and running, because we want to get those sites activated as soon as possible and continue that momentum forward. On more of the traditional legal side, you have new opportunities, new relationships with sponsors and other vendors, critical business relationships, and you got to get it in writing. So everyone involved remembers what is expected of them and what needs to be done. And a lot of that is a business question, but you want to make sure that there's a lot of certainty around how those are structured so that you remove the uncertainty as much as possible. Predictability and certainty work very well for this business, because the last thing you want to do when you're trying to help drive a new therapy, a new device that could change the lives of people around the world, is to worry about the fine print in a contract somewhere. So we want to make sure everyone's on the same page as much as we can. The other aspect beyond the legal operations is the compliance. And we talked about that earlier, with when you've got different rules in different countries and regions, and you have to be able to conduct that same study on that same new therapy, but you might have to adjust it just a little way here or there just to make sure you're following the rules in that place.
How do you balance the business objectives, risk, compliance, growth? It's like you feel like you're getting pulled in a lot of different directions. And I know that sometimes people see the legal department as the people that come in and say, no, we can't do it that way. So how do you balance all of that?
Right. I don't ever like to say no. Sometimes I have to, obviously, but I like to be one of those who says yes, but, or, you know, this is how we can do it. Let's
Mhm.
find a way.
Solutions versus
Solutions
yes.
oriented. That's right. You do have to look at the whole set of considerations from what we're looking at in a given moment to really over the life of a study or even beyond life of a relationship. And in law school, they call that issue spotting. And that's something we get trained on, and all lawyers get trained on in law school. And it's something that you carry forward into your environment where you find yourself. And here, I've got a great team, and they can help me spot those issues. I have obviously my experience that I bring to the table, but then I have great partners within the legal team that have a great deal of experience that come from Germany or Spain or elsewhere and can help me consider different factors that I wouldn't necessarily have thought of.
Clinical research being as highly regulated as it is, how have you seen the legal and regulatory landscape change over time? I know there's lots of regulations coming out and new things, and it changes all the time. How has it been changing?
That's right. Man, we could devote an entire podcast to
I
that.
bet.
I would say, just as a high level answer, those kind of go into two buckets. There's regulations that are and laws that are directed towards research and are meant to have a direct impact on what we do and how we do it. There are other regulations that may be designed for something else entirely, but that affect our business one way or the other. And so we have to adapt with the times as well, where technology marches on. I think a good example is HIPAA. I think most people listening in the US are familiar with HIPAA. They fill out those forms whenever they go to the doctor. That was a law that was originally passed in 1996. I think you saw a lot of the regulatory regime kind of come into effect in the early 2000s. That law and regulation has changed a little bit. There have been some tweaks in the last 10 or 15 years or so, but it's mainly stayed the same. It's the technology that has marched on. And so how do you adapt the new tools to fit the standards in the regulation? I think that's a good example of you may have a regulation that's been on the books for in some cases a half a century, but how do you in 2026 or beyond carry on your operations or your business in such a way that maintains compliance with those standards, even if it was beyond the wildest dreams of whoever was writing it back at that time?
So you mentioned that sometimes crossing those imaginary lines can completely change the rules. What are the biggest challenges organizations face when operating across multiple countries and regions?
I don't like to look at it as challenges. I like to look at it as opportunities.
Great.
But every country where you're conducting a trial will have its own unique history and its way of safeguarding the safety of human research subjects. So with ours, obviously there's a lot of regulations that came into effect as a result of the infamous Tuskegee syphilis study. And for the movie buffs that may be listening, I grew up in the late 80s, early 90s. And so there was a made for TV movie called Miss Evers Boys with Lawrence Fishburne and a number of other great actors in that film. And I remember watching that as a kid and just being shocked by it. And then as I became an adult, realizing that a lot of the regulations that are enforced now as they relate to people that are study subjects came out of that awful experience. And I'm sure there's stories behind the regulations in each one of those countries where we have a presence. When we look at those opportunities, we have to look at the bedrock principles. Ultimately, while it may present a challenge to comply or to adjust to a certain requirement, the bedrock principle is to move medicine forward, move science forward in a way that is respectful and protective of the human beings that we are ultimately seeking to benefit. And so that's always going to be a balancing act, and it has to be done well and has to be done ethically. You adjust as you need to with the different rules here and there, but that general principle is what we're always after, and I don't think there's any objection there.
How do you approach navigating uncertainty and change in an increasingly complex environment?
We obviously live in a time of rapid change, and it gives me, when I'm talking to my sons, I've got currently a 13-year-old and an 11-year-old, and we talk about AI and we talk about all the different changes that are coming and are already here. And I compare it to when I was growing up and the World Wide Web was a new thing, and this is going to revolutionize the business world and the world as we know it. And it did. And there were advantages and there were disadvantages, and there were things that they're great and things that were not so great. And I guess I confront these changes a lot of the same way. One of my favorite business books is called Heroic Leadership. It's by a guy named Chris Lowney. No, I'm not getting paid to say that, but he was actually a former Jesuit who went into, I think, finance or some other business role and really drew upon his training when he was still a Jesuit and wrote this book basically explaining how even 450 years ago, they were dealing with a time of immense change. And had to adapt to a rapidly changing world. So a lot of these patterns that we find ourselves in are really there's new circumstances, but how we are able to adapt to that change is part of our human nature. And so I'm sure we'll find a way just like we have in the past, and hopefully it's to a better tomorrow.
So let's talk about that AI. As it gains traction across the life science industry, from your perspective, what opportunities and legal considerations should organizations be thinking about as they adopt these new technologies?
My pragmatic approach also comes with a fair degree of caution. And so, while I do think that there's a lot of promise for AI, we always have to remember any potential risks that are there and to move forward soberly, realistically, that it probably has a lot of promise, but it doesn't mean we ignore the risk. And so, when I think of the risk, obviously, there's confidentiality questions. How much of what I'm inputting into the system is now no longer confidential? We have a very special role in these studies, whether it's the biggest biotech pharma company in the world or the smallest, youngest startup. Someone has come up with an idea to help improve the lives of others that takes a lot of time, a lot of investment. And so, how do you protect that and not make that just available to the world before it's not ready to be, or while they're still trying to develop this idea? And so, how do you do that? And I know my understanding is that there are ways of doing that with AI, and there's ways of still capitalizing and finding great efficiencies and reducing some of the repetitive work and things like that. But like any tool, we have to still have a human at the helm and making wise decisions and using it appropriately, and then making sure we're not over relying on it in a way that could cause some kind of exposure or harm.
What opportunities excite you the most about the future of the clinical research industry?
Every time I see a list of things that we're working on, or really even the industry as a whole is working on, I get excited. And that a lot of things that grab the headlines, the latest flu shot, which neither I nor any of my family are ever really excited to go get a flu shot, but that might make the headlines. But you've got these therapies that are going to change the lives of people who really need some help and how they're might be dealing with an illness or condition that really affects their quality of life. And so this might be an answer to that. And so getting back to movies on basic cable in the 1990s, one that I held on to for a long time and still do is a made for TV movie called And the Band Played On. And it was a story about the AIDS epidemic and how it developed, and a team of researchers at the CDC as they're trying to confront the growing epidemic, and they're not sure even what they're dealing with. And at the time that that was made in the early 90s, a person living with HIV or AIDS, their outlook was a certain death. It was just a matter of time. And then you fast forward to 2026 and the therapies that are available, it's almost unfathomable based on where we were at that point in history. And you take that, and that's just one example, but you look at all kinds of other conditions that people may have an awareness of broadly or not, but nonetheless affect human beings. And so when it comes down to it, the idea of improving my fellow human beings' lives, even indirectly through being a lawyer at a CRO, makes me excited.
Ian, I have one final question for you. What advice would you give a professional interested in pursuing a career in legal affairs within the life science industry?
I think be ready for an exciting, fast paced career that is rewarding in that you are part of a bigger team that is improving the lives of others. And not everyone in law gets to say that. One of the things that I remember most about early in my career, and I did spend a lot of time in litigation, and I enjoyed it. It was interesting work and I learned a lot. But when a case would go to trial for my client and for the client on the other side of the aisle, it was either the worst time of their life or right up there. I mean, no one was having fun. And that's not to take anything away from trial work. It's necessary. It's a great process. But for me personally, it's very rewarding to be part of a solution where everyone comes out ahead. And in particular, the people who are ultimately benefiting from these new therapies.
Thank you to Ian Hennessey for joining us and sharing his insights on leadership, legal strategy, global compliance, and the critical role legal affairs plays in advancing clinical research. From navigating evolving regulations to embracing new technologies responsibly, Ian offered a valuable look at how the legal function helps bring innovative therapies closer to the patients who need them the most. And as always, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with a friend, and leave us a review. Visit ctifacts.com to learn more about how we can help you with your clinical trials. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and keep moving medicine forward.